Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will be talking about the contract theory. So, first, let me ask have you ever experienced haggling for a certain item? Sa paghahagil or yung makikipagtawaran sa seller, it is there is no right price. Kumbaga, mag-uusap kayo between buyer and seller kung ano yung best price for the two of you. So, it is an agreement. Like, for example, sa isang gulay, pag sinabing um, yung sa side ng seller gusto niya ng ganitong price, tas pwede pala siyang ma-discuss and put into an agreement na magkakasundo yung dalawa, yung buyer and the seller. So this the same logic, yung agreement, yung fact na nagkaroon ng agreement between the two can be used, or this logic can be used and be applicable with a lot more instances. And this logic or these simple agreements can be the basis of ethics. So pwede pala yun na yung agreement pala ng between two people ay pwedeng maging basehan ng ethics. Nasasabi nating or makakapag-decide tayo ng ethical decisions based sa ating naging agreement. So, this ethical theory is actually called contract theory. Later, i-discuss natin kung bakit contract theory. And also, we will be able to discuss the metaphor na sabi state of nature, which explains the usefulness of contracts and how ethics emerges from humanity's attempt to escape from it. Also, we will be able to discuss John Rawls' argument about the concept of justice and just social institutions. So, question. What if the right thing to do does not depend on its consequences, principles, or virtues, but instead on agreements of people? For example, si Ed and si Brad, nagkaroon sila ng agreement na bawal tayong magkasakitan. Gets ba yun? Bawal tayong magkasakitan. Si Ed, hindi dapat niya suntukin si Brad. And the same thing goes as well kay Brad. So, what if itong agreement nila, napunta sila sa boxing. Pag hindi nila sinunod yung agreement na yun, so mag-G kumbaga G sila sa sports ng boxing. Sila, parang hindi na siya naging ethical decision kasi nagkaroon tayo ng agreement na bawal tayo magkasakitan. Pero nung napunta sila sa boxing, hindi nila sinunod yung agreement nila. So kapag naman sinunod nila yung agreement nila, hindi sila naglalaro ng boxing even if it is a sport. So, gets nyo ba yung ganyang situation na because of an agreement, nagkaroon na sila ng thinking what is ethically right and ethically wrong. And ethically right kapag sinunod nyo yung agreement, and it is ethically wrong kapag hindi mo sinunod yung agreement. Kasi minsan, pwede rin pala natin ibase yung ethical decisions based sa agreement ng mga tao. So, next. Sinasabi din dito na yung ethics will not exist if not until nagkaroon ng agreement between people. Yun yung sinasabi dito. Well, agreements, so are contracts between two people. Pag pala kunwari, kahit sabihin nating walang pirmahang naganap, pero verbally nagkaroon tayo ng agreement, it is already considered as contract. Kasi nako-confuse yung mga tao na yung pag sinabing contract, kailangan pipirma, like marriage contract, o divorce contract. Contract pa term doon. Hindi ko sure. Pero yung mga kailangan na sinabing contract, ay need ng pirmahan para masabing contract. Hindi pala. So yung palang verbal contracts, like for example, magkita tayo ng ganito, payag ka ganyan, o di kaya anything na related na pwedeng pag-agrihan ng dalawang magkaibang tao. Of course. And pwede rin yung handshakes. Di ba, ayan, tulad ng nasa example, na nasa image, pwede pala yun ng kahit handshakes lang, nagkaroon na tayo ng contract, nakakreate na ng contract yung dalawang tao. So, pag sinabing contract, it is always an agreement between two people. So, paano nga bang masasabi na anong klaseng contracts yung kino-consider ng mga contract theorists? Sabi nila, contract theorists only considers the best agreement between people. Paano ba masasabing the best? Kasi minsan daw, yung mga agreement ay some of it is exploitative. So parang hindi siya good agreement. Like baka mamaya yung agreement nila ay kidnapin mo si ganito, di kaya patay mo si ganyan. Diba hindi naman yun. Hindi mo masasabing best agreement yun kasi hindi naman taga-tama. So yung mga agreement lang na kino-consider ng mga theorists ay yung magandang klase ng agreement. So through this perspective, we will be able to understand more about ethics. Okay, moving forward, we have Thomas Hobbes. So kapag sinabi kasi natin contract theory, si Thomas Hobbes agad yung maiisip dapat ng mga tao. Siya kasi yung unang siya yung kumbaga nag-discuss about the contract theory. So he wrote the book Leviathan. Kung familiar kayo doon. So first, he was the first to lay out mga principles na hindi related sa religion. And yan nga, nagkaroon siya ng attempt to create a new ethical theory, which is the contract theory. So it simply means, next, yung term na state of nature, which is nabanggit ko, na-discuss din niya yun. So, sinabi, ayan, yung nakikita niya sa aking PowerPoint presentation, state of nature. So, ano tong sinasabing state of nature? It simply means the war of all against all. So, ano tong war of all against all? Kasi ang nature daw ng tao, for example, yan, nakatira tayo sa bahay, knowing na anytime pwede tayong pasukan ng tao, di kaya patayin tayo while we were sleeping. Ganun yung nature ng tao. Hindi, kumbaga, hindi safe. Kasi parang ang sa atin lagi is to survive. Yun yung sinasabi ng the war of all against all. So, dito, sinasabi, without contract theory, wala talaga tayong mapagkakatiwalaan. Kasi, di ba, kapag nga war of all, we are aware na wala tayong pwedeng pagkatiwalaan. Na, di ba nga, kahit yung mga friends natin, minsan, naipapahamak tayo. Kasi yun daw yung sinasabing state of nature. It is about surviving or kasi sino mas magbe-benefit more. So, without contract theory, walang agreement. For example, yung sa batas siguro na napagkasunduan ng mga tao kay bawal pumatay. Yun kung hindi dahil doon, wala talaga tayong mapagkakatiwalaan. So, dito papasok yung problem na without assurance, the person will keep the agreement he settled ahead of time. So, without assurance na that person, without assurance na that person will keep the agreement he settled ahead of time. So, ito naman, marerelate naman natin to into prisoner's dilemma. Diba kasi may mga agreement tayo na hindi minsan natutupad. Minsan nga sinasabi na drawing, ganyan. Or di kaya ibang bagay na pag-usapan, tapos biglang, nung nandun na sa situation, hindi pala niya gagawin yung agreement na yun. Doon papasok yung prisoner's dilemma. So, ano meron dito sa prisoner's dilemma? For example, we have character na si Ken and Jacob. Si Ken at Jacob ay parehong may ginawang kasalanan. Dahil hindi sila nagkaroon ng agreement ahead of time, ayan, prisoner's dilemma. Dahil hindi sila nagkaroon ng agreement ahead of time, ang pagkakatiwalaan na lang siguro nila is yung kung paano nila nakilala yung isa't isa. For example, either si Ken ay ituturo niya lang si Jacob na siya lang may kasalanan, mababawasan yung lalaya si Ken if hindi magsasalita si Jacob. Dahil, syempre, mag-friends sila. Sino yung, kumbaga, depende talaga kung aamin si Jacob na si Ken din daw yung may kasalanan. Kapag ganun yung nangyari na si Ken at si Jacob inagturuan na sila lang may kasalanan, pareho silang makukulong for 6 years. Pero kapag naman hindi sila nakulong, ay hindi sila umamin na kunwari na nahimik lang sila, parang pinagkatiwalaan nila yung kabilang side na hindi aamin, ikukulong lang sila for 5 years. So, nakita niyo yung problem doon na what if walang agreement ahead of time? Mapagkakatiwalaan mo ba yung isang tao na hindi ka itutulak sa ganung bagay na ikaw lang yung mapapahamak even though pareho kayo may ginawang kasalanan? Doon yung papasok yung prisoner's dilemma. Yun yung mismong thought ng prisoner's dilemma. So, ano bang mas ethical doon? Yung hindi sila magsasalita, di ba? Kasi parang kapag nalaman nila, lalo mawawala ng trust yung isa. So, yun yung, etong prisoner's dilemma, actually can have the same experiences in reality. Like countries fight an arms race. For example, at Philippines, hindi tayo nag-build ng weapons. So, parang nagkakaroon ng benefit yung ibang country na mag-build ng weapons. Then, someday, who knows, baka tayo yung mapasama. Yung tulad nun sa prisoner's dilemma na yung isa hindi magsasalita tapos yung isa pala ay ipupush ka na ikaw daw may kasalanan. Yung ganong experience. Then meron ding merging two lanes in one lane. Diba minsan may mga traffic tapos sabay may mga may gustong mauna dahil dun sa hindi mo naman mapagkakatiwalaan yung iba na hindi gagawin yun, magkakaroon ng mas malaking problem. Di ko alam kung naiintindihan. Or price wars. Yan nga. For example, si Jollibee nagbaba ng presyo. Yung isa din, magbababa din siya ng presyo. Or kapag naman hindi nagbaba ng presyo si Jollibee, magsistay din si McDo, for example, nung kung anong kanyang price. Parang ganun nakikita na yung decision making ng dalawang establishment. Na if ever kasi na hindi magbaba ng presyo si McDo, edi mas malulugi siya kasi mas naging cheaper yung Jollibee. Then syempre kung saan yung mas magbe-benefit yung mga tao, doon sila. Kaya doon din na-experience yung prisoner's dilemma. So dito, we will be able to experience this and needed a huge faith on the person in order to decide whether or not to honor the agreement. Then, we will be going back once again to war of all wars, which is yung the state of nature. So, na-discuss natin ano yung contract theory. Ito yung summarization. So, contract theory is a agreement between people na dito binabase kung yung ethics. So, nabanggit ko din yung nature, state of nature na kung saan wala tayong mapagkakatiwalaan kasi ang sa state of nature more on yung kung paano masusurvive yung isang individual kahit mapapahamak yung isang individual. Kaya kailangan natin ng agreement para magkaroon tayo ng trust somehow sa tao na i-honor niya yung agreement na yun. So na-discuss ko din yung prisoner's dilemma, which is yun ngang magiging problem sa isang agreement if ever or kung either i-honor ba ng isang tao yung agreement niyo ahead of time or not. So yun yung introduction nitong ating contract theory. So for our next reporter, take it away.
So good day. Thank you for that. So good day, everyone. So I'm Diana Marie in Purca, and I will discuss the next topic. So it was stated with the previous reporter that when we are in a state of nature, no one can get anything. So everything will be an endless cycle of prisoner's dilemma, and that it will seem like a fruitless competition. So you cannot gain anything. So imagine yourself living like that, puro competition, lamangan, gulangan, yabangan. In short term, our lives will be chaotic, and no one wants that, right? That's why it is clear that something with the state of nature has to change. The question is, how do you escape from a prisoner's dilemma and get people to cooperate? So with that question, Hobbes thought that society had only the following option, which is to choose a sovereign who has the power to settle this dispute all by himself. So when we say sovereign, this refers to the king or queen or the other royal ruler of the country. So Habes was standing up on the side of the king during the English Civil War on the 17th century. So kaya ganito ang kanyang mindset. So going back in the context of the state of nature, when two parties enter into a contract, sabi nga ng naunang reporter, walang kasiguraduhan na pareho silang tutupad sa napag-usapan o pinag-usapan nila. There will always the space na pareho silang either of them ang hindi tutupad sa napag-usapan. At paulit-ulit lang na maghihilaan sila pababa, and sabi ko nga it will be an endless cycle. So ikaw ba, papayag ka ba na sa isang usapan if hindi ka naman 100% sure na tutupad siya or pareho kayong nasa same page kayong dalawa? Of course, no. Diyan pumapasok ang context of the sovereign. May kapangyarihan ng sovereign to punish any part or individual who doesn't fulfill his contract obligation. So with that assurance, the sovereign would step in kapag may isang party na hindi tumupad, then the people would no longer fear entering into contracts with one another. So in Habes system then, the sovereign is protecting the interest of his people. Objective nitong tulungan ang mga tao to cooperate and escape the destruction of the prisoner's dilemma. Pero kung iisipin natin, there's more to it. So if agreement is the only component to ethical rules, then the sovereign is also creating the condition necessary for ethical behavior. So by guiding the people to keep their commitments na tumupad sa mga contracts, and with the sovereign laying down the law and works by and the works of the sovereign on judging dispute, ibig sabihin nito, the sovereign also simultaneously creates the difference between what's right and what is wrong. So nililigyan niya ng limitation yung what is right and what is wrong. So sa sovereign ang gagaling yun. But what if there's someone loses out o natalo sa isang dispute? So that someone felt that he should be recognized as right, yet the sovereign placed that someone as wrong. And because of anger, that someone tries to kill the king. Dito na pumapasok ang isa sa mga paniniwala ni Habes that people should alienate their natural right to the king. To alienate means to give it away and not to get it back. It seems like a big deal kung pakikinggan natin. Bakit mo nga naman ibibigay ang natural rights mo sa ibang tao? But according to Habes, if you didn't give it, means that we will go back to the state of nature when no one is happy, lahat magulo, maghihilaan lang tayo pababa, and the life would be poor and short. So in line with his idea, an individual daw should trade his natural rights for an escape of the state of nature. So isipin daw natin kung anong mga potential na bagay ang pwede nating makamtan outside the state of nature, and let's compare it sa buhay natin if nandun tayo sa loob ng state of nature. Ayan. So, and with that, upon thinking of that, ang gusto ba natin ng buhay na magulo, ganyan, or susubukan nating lumabas doon sa state of nature by trading our natural rights. So with that, we can all agree, or at somehow, maiisip natin na sige, subukan nating lumabas sa state of nature, and let's invest on giving up our or alienate our natural rights to the sovereign. But who plays the role of the sovereign in our modern societies? Lalo na when we are practicing democracy in our country. So where people make the law through electing their representative in the government. And this government, the whole government, plays the role of the sovereign. It makes the laws about the contracts, runs the judicial system. They also punish individuals who broke their contract obligations. And with that, upon thinking of it, in our modern times today, the rule of law also underwrites or came from the agreements between the people. So yun yung sunod na slide natin. Next slide po. Next slide po. Ayan, thank you po. So when we are moving in the modern form of social contracts, when people came together in a democratic society to establish a government to enforce their agreements, they are actually entering something in a something bigger picture, and that is a social contract. So the contract forms is described as the backbone of almost all modern society. At gaya nga ng nabanggit kanina, that contracts also creates ethical standard as well. So itong social contract na ito gives an common ethical restrictions such as ano bang mga dapat gawin sa mga theft, murder, dishonesty, and so on, and other preventive measure na nililimitahan na kung ano dapat ang right and wrong. Diba? So sinasabi niya rin dito na the key to social contract is being able to rely on others that they will fulfill their contract. So nabanggit kanina, no, na parang takot daw tayong mag-invest or makisama o bumuo na isang kontrata kasi hindi naman tayo 100% sure na tutupad sila. So, gawin nating example. So, you're probably a decent person. So, alam mo na mali ang pumatay. But if people are coming to you na may dala silang knives and guns and pinagbabantaan ka, you'll probably say, this is not what I signed up for. So, hindi dapat ganito. And start defending yourself. So, with that society has a group of people hired to enforce the social contract. So, that is no other than the police. So the law enforcement makes it possible for the people to move in the society to ensure that the law is properly implemented. Dahil dito, sa nabanggit kong punto ng the police, ito yung na-vision ni Habes na implementation or ito yung gusto niyang makamtan sa pinopropose niyang sovereign during 17th century. At isa sa mga key points ni Habes that when we imagine the sovereign, at ayun nga, sa mga key points ni Habes na nabanggit niya, that people should alienate their natural rights to the king, which is obviously not applicable with today's democratic societies. So alam na natin, obvious naman siguro na hindi siya applicable talaga. So it will be put as if you give away your rights to the government, then you're not getting, there's a chance or hindi na natin siya makukuha pabalik. And remember that democracy does not relies on just one individual leader that will lead or hawak ng government, diba? In a democratic society, the people are electing presidents. Then the question is, how can people alienate their rights to the president and then keep electing different presidents? So this question was answered through John Locke, which is an English philosopher. So we probably heard his name during our junior high school or senior high school days. So he said that the secret in the different layer between the chief executive, which is the leader or the president, is what Locke called the civil society. So according to Locke, the president didn't get his right to judge dispute because it is alienated o dahil ipinasa sa kanya ito ng mga tao. Instead, he got his power to enforce the law on contracts, to enforce laws and contracts on loan. So he hiniram, borrowed, pinahiram muna sa kanya ng civil society. So ito ay galing sa civil society. At itong civil society naman gets its power from the people or citizen in which make up the society. So meaning ang civil society ay mga tao bumubuo ng lipunan. So with that, we conclude that as the movement of social contracts in modern times today, the head of the government only has a power which is loan. Ipinahiram sa kanya ng civil society that if hindi nagustuhan ng civil society the way that the president works or nakita nilang may mali sa mga trabaho nito at hindi nila nagustuhan, then the civil society has all the rights to get that power back. So this is also linked to the theory behind elections na ginagawa natin. So the elections are decision made by the civil society to continue granting power to the head of the government. Or patalsikin ito kung hindi nila nagustuhan yung pamumuno niya and give it to someone else through electing new leaders who will be in charge of the government and to enforce laws in the country. So I hope it is clear that as the modern form of social contract. So ayan yung summary ng portion ng mga ideas and mga beliefs ni Havis na nabuo from 7th century, which is the vision niya na totoo na naging applicable ito. And ginamit natin itong beliefs ang mga paniniwala or mga key points ni Havis para to move in a modern form, in a modern times, para makita natin na it's still existing in present times, lalo na sa panahon natin ngayon. Ayan, I hope you learned something and that's the end of my report. I'm giving the floor to the next reporter. Thank you.
Hello, akin na ba? Akin na. Good day. Today I will discuss the restructuring social institution according to Rawls' theory of justice. Next slide. "300 years after Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher named John Rawls upgraded the contract theory received. As we note earlier in the chapters, Hobbes defended a model of contract theory that required a king to make sure everyone lived up to the terms of their contract. Since the most popular kings are the Burger King, Sofa King, and Elvis Presley, this way of thinking is fundamentally unsatisfying for people living in the modern democracy. So Rawls attempted to merge Hobbes' social contract theory with the stress on reason from the ethics of Immanuel Kant. Those two theories that Rawls combined was presented to a book called A Theory of Justice, and it's reignited philosophers' interest in the contract theory and political philosophy. Rawls had an ambition project. He had to show that people could rationally agree to principles of justice for ordering not just individual lives, but for all of the society. This principle form the core of a theory of justice. In the following section, we will see how Rawls set up a situation called the original position and how he believed it leads to principles of justice that are far different from what considered just in today's society. Next slide. So before we go diving into the following sections, we should know that Rawls' theory is a little different from the other ethical theories in the book. In particular, Rawls isn't arguing that we should use his theory to make decisions about how to run our lives, but rather, his theory applies to social institutions and for an individual purpose, governmental institution. This is no small problem in ethics. It's one thing to say that one's own actions are ethical or unethical. It's another to say that governmental actions are just or that a certain law is just. Governments and nations are much larger and more complex than individuals. So keep in mind that Rawls wants to focus our attention on things like how tax should be spent and what the Department of Education should be doing, rather than on what is morally okay to eat your pet cat. Next. Next is taking stock of the original position and its veil of ignorance. This is the result of Rawls' theory. Next slide, please. It seems impossible getting everyone to agree on how social institutions should be. After all, many different people want many different things from their government. Some want government to help out everyone as much as possible, and others are interested only on themselves. So Rawls thinks he has a way of bringing people together that will end up making both sides happy. And he called this way the original position. So the original position is a hypothetical scenario where people of all different walks of life come together to start a society. In this scenario, he asked, what kind of society would people choose if they had to start over again and from ground zero? And Rawls thinks it would be a big mess try to recreate society in this way because business leader would argue that society should minimize taxes. Men may argue that they should get more rights than women, and women may argue that they should get more rights than than men. And racists may argue that ethnic minorities deserve worse treatment, and ethnic minority may argue that they should be more empowered than they are in today's society. But Rawls had a brilliant idea. So what if these people getting together to restructure society didn't know whether they were going to be a business leader, beggar, women, men, ethnic minority, rich or poor in this new society? If this were the case, they would try to structure the society from behind and what Rawls called the veil of ignorance. The only thing these people would know are that they are rationally and mutually disinterested. Behind this veil of ignorance, everyone is completely ignorant. Sorry. Behind this veil of ignorance, everyone is completely ignorant of their particular social roles. All that is left of people's lives is their ends as rational creatures. Imagine that you are one of these people constructing a new society behind Rawls' veil of ignorance, and that you don't know whether you're going to be a man or a woman in this new society. What kind of policies about sex or gender would you choose? Rawls think that you would avoid some kind of policies you wouldn't. So for an instance, you choose a policy that gives men all the rights and denies women that right to vote. You wouldn't choose this policy because, well, you may turn out to be a woman in this new society. Rawls think that you choose a society in which men and women are treated equally and have equally opportunities to get all the values and things in life. He thinks that people in this original position would naturally choose a maximize strategy. On that maximize the benefits to people in these worst social roles. So in the other word, you don't know who you will be in this new society. So you want to make sure that the worst case scenario would be as good as possible. Next. This whole setup is supposed to ensure that the outcome in the new society are fair for everyone. Rawls named for his view justice as fairness, and Rawls believes that his position is a form of contract theory because the people in the original position would actually agree to structure society in a certain way, thereby constituting constituting principles of justice, and he doesn't stop at saying that the principles of a just society would hold for this imaginary society people would create. Because the original position models people idea, rational selves, and the principle of justice would hold for institution in the real world as well. Thus, the original position becomes a yardstick by which people can measure the justice of an actual social institution, not just the imaginary ones. That's all.
And good afternoon. I'm Maria Erika Mendoza, and I will be reporting about arriving at the liberty and difference principles by John Rawls. So, the original position is supposed to be the framework in which people would agree on how to structure a just society. So, what kinds of structure would be chosen? Rawls believed that people behind the veil of ignorance in the original position would choose to found a just society on two principles: the liberty principle and the difference principle. Because the original position is rational, Rawls thinks people also can use these principles to evaluate existing institutions. Rawls thinks that people would choose these two principles because folks behind the veil of ignorance don't know what social group they'll be part of in the new society. If they aren't privy to this information, they want to choose principles according to a maximum strategy that gives them the best possible life, even if they win up in the worst possible group. Next slide. The liberty principle, or maximizing freedom. Next slide. So each person has the same indivisible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which scheme is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. That sounds pretty complicated, so think of liberty principle in this way. Everybody ought to have the most extreme number of opportunities, as long as every other person has those opportunities as well. The freedom guideline catches something key about individuals. Pabak po muna. So, and the freedom guidelines catches something key about individuals' inclinations in the society that all things considered they like doing what they need. Opportunity permits individuals to practice command over their own lives and settle on their own choices. So normally, individuals appear to need however much opportunities as could be expected. Be that as it may, society can simply allow individuals to do anything they desire. A few groups need to do insidious things like murder others and take candy from kids. In the event that society permitted individuals to do these things, these activities would encroach on others' opportunities. Oh, in the event that you slaughter somebody, that individual is not at this point allowed to do what she needs. On the off chance that you take candy from a kid, that kid is not at this point allowed to make the most of her property. So, Rawls is contending that individuals ought to be permitted to to whatever they like to do as long as they aren't more liberated than every other person. For example, consider this perfect nurturing stunt that clarifies why individuals would pick equivalent freedoms. Say that a large portion of pie is in the fridge and that Yana and Jacob are battling about who gets a greater amount of it. In the event that their parents are on their toes, they may introduce the accompanying trade-off. Yana will cut the pie into two pieces. However, Jacob will pick what part he needs. For this situation, Yana's most ideal system for getting the most pie is to cut the pie into two equivalent pieces. That way, she's guaranteed of getting any event as much pie as Jacob. If you had to start a new society and didn't know, who would you be? Would you choose the liberty principle to help you make decisions? It's difficult to say that you wouldn't. If you didn't, you may end up in a group that had less liberty than everyone else. Equal liberty looks like it's in your best interest. So the main example of liberty principle nowadays are political liberty or the right to vote and be eligible for public office, freedom of speech, right to hold personal property, and liberty conscience or freedom of thought. Next slide. The deference principle or fixing unfair inequalities. The second principle focused on equality. Rawls realized that a society could not avoid inequalities among its people. Inequalities result from such things as one's inherited characteristics, social class, personal motivation, and even luck. Even so, Rawls insisted that a just society should find ways to reduce inequalities in areas where it can act. It's fair to say that the difference principle is a little bit more complicated than the liberty principle. It has two parts and goes like this. Next slide. Social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. First, they are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Second, they are to be the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of the society. You can get most of its meaning from replacing the principle in the following way. Any friendly or monetary disparities in the society ought to be appended to places that anybody can hope and ought to be to the advantage of the most unwell-off in the public eye. By offices and positions in his second principle, Rawls meant especially that best jobs in private businesses and public employment. He said that this job should be open to everyone by the society providing fair equality of opportunity. One way for a society to do this would be to eliminate discrimination. Another way would be to provide everyone easy access to education. Under the difference principle, Rawls favored maximizing the improvement of the least advantaged group in society. He would do this not only by providing fair equality of opportunity, but also by such possible ways as a guaranteed minimum income or minimum wage. Rawls recognized that despite the fact that individuals in the original position would pick equivalent freedoms, they may not decide to give everybody an equivalent portion of society's primary goods. They may pick this way since equivalent offers may discourage the number of society's primary goods can make. For instance, if Michael has a 1 million to contribute and can pick any method of putting it into two organizations, say that his wife is showcasing a business or his 5-year-old child has a lemonade stand, it would be pretty senseless to give each other a $500,000. Parang it's unfair. The profit from the venture would be significantly better if Michael gave a lot of cash to Kara's business or to his wife's business. Next slide. Any inequalities have to be attached to positions up and all. Here, Raul is talking about political power. As time change, so do inequalities. It won't do to have the same people in charge of those inequalities forever. As new challenges arise, it won't do to have a political power concentrated in one class. Thus, everyone should have an equal opportunity to serve in these offices. Without this principle, leaders could grow out of touch with the conditions among their followers. Next slide. Any inequalities have to benefit the least well-off. So in other words, social policies can only treat people unequally if that treatment ends up helping the worst of people in the most. This is the most important part of the difference principle and would cause the greatest changes to current social institutions. A wide range of variables and frameworks in society can make imbalances. Presumably, the greatest factor is that on the off chance that you have rich guardians, you're, you'll probably be rich yourself. Truth to behold, most nations permit guardians to give practically the entirety of their abundance to their children. All things considered, your parents reserve the option to do what they need with their cash. Yet, legitimate as this may appear, the approach of permitting guardians to give enormous legacies create a critical imbalance in the society. The children of parents with bunch of cash don't need to fill in as difficult to make their fortune throughout everyday life. They can go to a better schools, drive better vehicles, and start organization more effectively than individuals whose guardians are poor. Raw differences principle calls out just a policy as unjust. This type of system should only be permitted if it somehow benefits poorer people the most. As it stands, passing down inheritance to one's children looks to benefit the most advantaged much more than the least advantaged. So according to the difference principle, unlimited, unrestricted inheritance is unjust. However, this doesn't mean that inheritance has to be stopped. Rather, it could be taxed. If these taxes, if this tax were then used to establish schools, hospitals, and playgrounds for the poorest children, who are among the least advantaged in society, then inheritance with the modest stocks would be a more just institution. Next slide. Making social policies that reward luck and punish bad luck don't make such sense. Ideally, you want policies that reward hard work or merit. It only makes sense to reward and punish people for things they actually have control over. If you were born to a very poor family, society can society certainly shouldn't make policies that hold you back. Why not then redirect resources from people who were very lucky in their starting places to people who were unlucky in theirs? So in a way, you can think of the people in the original position as people who are about to be born into a society without any choice about where they go. Justice seems to require that society not let luck determine too much of someone's destiny, and the only way to minimize the effects of luck is to redirect resources from the unlucky to the extremely unlucky. So that will be all for my report, and I'm passing the floor to the next reporter. Thank you.
Okay, so this is my report, Beyond the Dotted Line, Criticizing Contract Theory. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so first of all is, but I never signed on the dotted line. So what is the dotted line? So it's been discussed. Contract theory is two people getting along or meeting halfway due to an agreement. So minsan hindi na kailangan ng agreement for two people to get along. So parang meron diyang unspoken agreement na porket ginawa mo to, ganyan. Because you did this, this will happen. And because you did this, we can get along. So that's how contract theory happens in implied, when it's implied through actions. So okay, dito tayo sa dotted line. But I never signed on the dotted line. So basing ethics on agreements like social contracts sound promising, honestly. It feels perfect kasi all you have to do is agree with one person, and if the other person agrees with you, perfect world, no problem. Okay, it describes ethics without divine beings and utility calculations. So you don't have to base on divine beings. Kumbaga mas magpo-focus ka sa how how humanity gets along with each other, or how you create harmony through each other without basing on something supernatural. So ayun, it doesn't look demanding kasi you don't have a set of rules to follow, rules na hindi ginawa ng tao. But no one ever seems to have explicitly agreed to the social contract. So next slide, please. Okay, how much of an agreement can something be if no one has ever agreed to it? Matatrato mo ba na agreement ang isang bagay if walang nag-agree doon? Na if nangyari lang siya because you did this. Okay, next slide. So implicit agreements to social contracts seem to be the norm for living in a society. So yun diniscuss ko kanina. Implicit agreements is parang implied through actions, no words to express your contract with another person. So if you aren't an immigrant who had to pass a citizenship exam, it's doubtful that anyone ever asked you whether you agreed to be bound by society's laws. So may na-encounter na ba kayo na Filipino citizen, pinanganak sa Pilipinas, tapos tinanong yung citizen na yun na, nag-agree ka ba na sumunod sa law? Di ba hindi? Nobody asks that kasi everybody expected you na porket pinanganak ka dito sa bansang to, automatically bound ka na dyan without the Filipino citizen or the child agreeing to those terms. So next is, it doesn't matter whether you agreed to the terms of the social contract. It matters whether, it matters whether you would agree to its terms if you were fully rational or aware sa situation na pinasok mo. So next is, you'd agree to be my friend if you knew what was good for you isn't the moral equivalent of you agreed to be my friend. So meron diyang malaking differences, guys. And unahin natin you agreed to be my friend. So simple, you agreed to be my friend. And next is, you'd agree to be my friend if you knew what was good for you. So parang conditional siya or something. It's like, kaibiganin mo ako kasi I'm good for you. Something like that. So next, magbibigay ako ng example to explain it further. Yeah, next slide, please. Ayan. So first one, actually hindi yan first. Ano yan? Hiniwalay ko lang siya through bullets. So first part is Sarah is taking her jog alone in a trail. So one day, a rich man jogs with her and tries to give her money out of nowhere. And Sarah finds this strange and proceeds to do what she was doing, running. So hindi niya pinansin, tumatakbo lang siya. And the next day, the rich man ran with her on the same trail again, and the day after, and the day after, the day after. So one day, Sarah took a different route, I don't know, nalimutan ko kung anong tawag doon. Pero yeah, she took another trail na hindi kasama yung rich guy. So the rich man showed up to her on her new trail and asked why she took a different route despite them being running buddies. So she mentioned that the man just showed up one day and tried to give her money. So paano kita magiging running buddy? Bigla kang lang nagpakita tapos inabot mo ako ng pera. Weird, man. So the man would counter that she would have been happy to be running buddies with him. Plus, she ran with him a few times already. So in the end, Sarah never really had an obligation to keep running with the man. So hindi porket nakipag-go with the flow ka lang sa isang tao, that doesn't mean abound ka na sa contract with him. So yan, let's focus dito sa two last bullets. The man would counter that she would have been happy to be running buddies with him, plus she ran with him a few times already. So hindi porket Sarah ran with the man a few times, buddies na agad sila. So, napakaraming possible assumptions kung bakit siya nakipagtakbuhan lang sa guy. Possible kasi hindi lang niya pinapansin and she doesn't want to be rude. So, tinuloy niya lang yung pagtatakbo with the guy. And then one day she got pissed. So, lumipat ng track. So, that doesn't mean na porket sabay silang tumatakbo for a few days is running buddies na sila. And before I end my presentation, magbibigay pa ako ng isang example para to make things clearer sa inyo. So, if ever napanood niyo yung movie na, ulit yun, yung may summer, 500 Days of Summer ata, I think, I forgot. Basta yung main character is Tom and Summer. So, meron dong part na they messed around, na they became friends and then they did stuff na hindi ginagawa normally ng friends. So, parang high-key dating. They even have eggs. And that didn't mean anything to Summer. She was just having fun. And ito si Tom na nag-assume na we did lots of things that magjowa would normally do. Hindi ba parang tayo na? And after that, Summer just told him na Tom was just her best friend. So ayun, that's an example of contract theory na hindi porket ginagawa ng isang tao yung gusto mo. That doesn't mean na kung ano yung iniisip mo, na kung ano meron kayo is ganun na. So another example is there's this girl, there's this boy. Nagiging mabait yung girl sa boy and ina-assume na agad ng boy na gusto siya ng girl. That's wrong. That's like, parang in-apply mo yung contract theory na you're nice to me. Hindi ba dapat tayo na? And the girl, hindi naman siya nag-agree sa contract na yon. Nobody mentioned a contract about them being them. So she has no obligation to say na tayo na sa guy. Okay, so medyo magulo yung explanation pero I hope you got it. I'm gonna turn this over to the next reporter now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for that, RJ. That was a very clear and sad example. So for our next reporter, we have Katrine Buenaventura, but unfortunately, she has agendas today. So she left some audio video na i-play ko na lang while presenting her PowerPoint. So here it goes.
Next topic is about Libertarianism. The proponents of the concept believe that through freedom of contract, individuals possess a general freedom to choose with whom to contract, whether to contract or not, and on which terms to contract. It means meron kang freedom of choice. For example, kapag yung tao gustong gumamit ng marijuana, dapat silang payagan na gawin yun. Kahit na nakakasira ito sa kanilang buhay. Dahil ito ay sariling pagpipilian nung gumagamit ng droga. Kasi ito ay sariling katawan niya. As long as yung drug user di nagsisimulang gumamit ng violence against other people or their legitimate property, walang sino man ang dapat gumamit ng karahasan laban sa gumagamit ng droga o sa lehitimong pag-aari ng gumagamit ng droga kahit na ang gobyerno. O kaya naman sa field trip. Kapag sumama ka, may plus grade ka sa lahat ng subjects mo. Pero kapag hindi ka naman sumama, gagawa ka ng project. So, may choice ka pumili kung sasama ka ba o hindi. Ang mahalaga, may agreement kayo. Kaya kung ano man consequences, tatanggapin mo kasi nagkaroon kayo ng agreement. So it means in a free society, you are free to act as long as you do not violate another person's equal freedom to do the same. And lastly is about communitarianism. Sa topic naman na to, it is considered the opposite of liberalism. And communitarianism believe that group is more important than individual. Ang example ko naman dito, Muslim, bawal kumain ng baboy kasi yun yung paniniwala or rules sa community nila. Kaya kapag month of Ramadan, fasting sila. So, bawat isa may pagkakasama o sumusunod sa policy. Since yun yung kultura na meron sila na dapat nilang sundin. In short, balancing the rights of responsibilities of individual with rights and responsibilities of community.
And that is the end of our report. I think that would be all for the contract theory. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, we are the group 6. Ciao.